If I had stopped at that red light, none of this would have happened, but the truth is I didn't stop because I couldn't. The rain was coming down so hard it blurred every streetlight into streaks of gold and white. My hands gripping the wheels so tight, they ached as I pushed my old Honda past 50 miles per hour, the engine whining like it knew it wasn't built for this. And in my rearview mirror those headlights were still there, steady, patient, like they had all the time in the world to catch me. I kept telling myself just one more block, just make the next turn, just don't let him get close enough to see my face again. Because if he did, I knew I wouldn't get another chance to leave, and that thought alone was enough to press my foot harder on the gas even as the light ahead shifted from yellow to red. Any normal person would have stopped, any rational person would have hit the brakes and accepted whatever came next. But fear doesn't make you rational, it makes you choose survival, even when it looks like a mistake. So I ran it. I ran straight through that red light and straight into the path of a black SUV that seemed to appear out of nowhere, too big, too clean, too expensive to belong in a moment like mine. The impact wasn't loud at first, just a sudden force that snapped everything forward, my breath catching as the seatbelt locked tight across my chest and the world spun into a blur of glass, rain, and flashing lights. And then everything went quiet in a way that didn't feel natural, like the city itself had paused to watch what would happen next. I remember sitting there, my hands still on the wheel, my pulse pounding in my ears as I tried to process what I'd just done, the smell of something sharp in the air, my heart racing not because of the crash, but because I knew this was the worst possible thing that could have happened to me tonight. Slowly, I pushed the door open and stepped out into the rain, my shoes hitting wet pavement as I looked at the damage. My car crumpled in a way I couldn't afford to fix. The SUV barely touched, like it had absorbed the collision without effort. And that's when I heard the doors open. Not just one, but several. The sound precise, controlled, and completely out of place in the chaos I'd created. I looked up, and the first thing I noticed wasn't the men stepping out around him. It was him, the way he moved, calm, deliberate, like nothing about this situation surprised him, like he had stepped into a scene he already understood. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that didn't belong in the rain, his expression unreadable as his eyes found mine. And for a second, everything else disappeared. The street, the storm, the fear that had been chasing me for the last 20 minutes. All of it faded under the weight of that single look. I opened my mouth, already forming apologies, explanations, promises I couldn't keep, anything to make this go away. But before I could say a word, he took a step closer, close enough that I could see the detail in his eyes, steady, focused, almost curious, and then he said it, like it was the most natural conclusion in the world. Good. Now you're my wife. And something in the way the men around him didn't react, didn't question, didn't even look surprised, made a cold realization settle deep in my chest that this crash, this moment, this meeting, it might not have been an accident at all. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my mind could not process anything else. The sound coming out shaky and wrong as I took a step back, rain soaking through my clothes, my heart still racing from everything that had happened in the last 5 minutes. And I said the only thing that made sense to me, that this was some kind of misunderstanding, that I would call my insurance, that I would figure out how to pay for the damage. Anything normal, anything that could pull this moment back into reality. But he did not respond the way a normal person would. He did not argue, did not raise his voice, did not even look at the car. His attention stayed on me like the rest of the world had stopped existing. And that was when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The men around him were not watching the damage either. They were watching me, not aggressively, not even openly. Just quietly aware, positioned in a way that made every direction feel closed without anyone actually touching me. I turned slightly, testing it, my eyes scanning the street, the sidewalks, the buildings, calculating how fast I could run, how far I could get before those headlights from before caught up again. Because they would, I knew they would. And for a second I thought maybe this was my chance. Maybe the crash had given me a way out. But then I realized something colder, something heavier. The car that had been following me was gone, completely gone, and the street behind me was empty like it had never existed at all. My breath caught, confusion mixing with fear as I looked back at him, and he tilted his head just slightly, like he could hear every thought I was trying to hide, like he understood the exact moment I realized I was no longer being chased, and that scared me more than the chase itself. "You should not stand in the rain," he said calmly, his voice steady, almost gentle, like we were discussing something ordinary instead of the fact that he had just claimed me as if I were part of a deal I did not remember making. And I shook my head, my fingers curling into fists as I forced myself to speak clearly, telling him no, that I was leaving, that whatever this was, it was not real, it could not be real, and I turned, taking one step away, then another, each movement heavy with the feeling of being watched, of being measured, and I almost made it 3 steps before his voice reached me again, not louder, not sharper, just certain, "Emily," and my body froze before my mind could catch up, my name hanging in the air between us like proof that something was very, very wrong. I turned slowly, every instinct screaming at me to deny it, to pretend I had not heard him, but I could not, and he was already closer now, not rushed, not forcing, just there, closing the distance like it had never existed in the first place, his eyes still locked on mine, steady and unreadable, and he said it again, quieter this time, like it belonged to him. "Emily Carter," and the way he said it made my chest tighten, because I had never told him. I had not even reached for my wallet. There had been no introductions, no questions, nothing that should have given him that information. And yet he knew. He knew exactly who I was. And I realized then that this night had not started with the crash. Not really. It had started long before I ever got behind the wheel, long before I ever saw those headlights in my mirror. And whatever I had just run into was not an accident waiting to happen. It was something that had been waiting for me. My name sounded different when he said it, like it carried weight I had never noticed before, and for a second I could not breathe, my thoughts scrambling to find a logical explanation, something simple, something safe, but nothing came, only the cold certainty that I had stepped into something I did not understand. I shook my head again, more forced this time, telling him he was wrong, that he had the wrong person, that I did not know him, my voice steadier than I felt as I took another step back, then another, refusing to let my fear root me in place, because staying meant accepting whatever this was, and I was not ready to do that, not even close. He did not reach for me, did not block my path, and somehow that made it worse, because the men around him shifted almost imperceptibly, just enough to remind me that every exit was still quietly controlled, every direction accounted for, like a chessboard where I had already lost without knowing the rules. "You always move first," he said, almost to himself, and the words hit me in a way they should not have, like they belonged to a conversation I had never had, like he was remembering something I could not access, and I felt a strange flicker of anger cut through the fear, sharp and grounding, because I was tired of being confused, tired of being watched, tired of feeling like a piece in someone else's plan. I told him again that I was leaving, that whatever game he thought he was playing, I was not part of it, and this time I turned fully, forcing my legs to move, each step heavier than the last, my pulse loud in my ears as I counted them. 1, 2, 3, waiting for something to happen, for someone to grab my arm or call me back, but nothing did, and for a brief, fragile moment I thought maybe I had been wrong. Maybe this was just a strange encounter that would fade the second I got far enough away. Then I heard it, not a shout, not a command, just his voice again, calm and steady behind me. "The car you were running from will not come back," and my steps faltered before I could stop them, the words catching me mid-stride, because he should not have known that either. He should not have known about the headlights, about the fear that had been pushing me forward before the crash, and slowly, against every instinct screaming at me to keep going, I turned back again. He was exactly where I had left him, rain sliding off his shoulders like it did not belong there, his gaze still fixed on me, patient, unhurried, and there was something else now, something quieter but more dangerous, like certainty settling into place. "You are safe here," he added, and I almost laughed again. Because nothing about this felt safe, not the empty street, not the silent men, not the way he spoke like he had already decided something for me, something permanent. "I do not need you to believe me," he continued, taking one slow step closer. "I only need you to understand that leaving right now would be a mistake." And there it was again, that calm confidence, not a threat, not even a warning, just a statement delivered like a fact, and I realized with a sinking feeling that he was not trying to convince me. He was simply telling me how things were going to be. I looked past him, scanning the street once more, searching for anything familiar, any sign that I could return to the life I had an hour ago. But the city felt different now, quieter, like it had shifted around this moment, like everything before this had been leading here without me noticing. And when I looked back at him, really looked this time, I saw it clearly for the first time. This was not about the crash, not about money, not about coincidence. This was something planned, something precise, and somehow, impossibly, I was at the center of it. The moment I realized I was not leaving, something inside me shifted, not acceptance, not yet, but a quiet understanding that whatever this was, it was bigger than a simple mistake, bigger than a wrong turn or a bad decision. And standing there in the rain arguing with him was not going to change that. I wrapped my arms around myself, not because I was cold, but because I needed something solid, something that still belonged to me. And I asked the question that had been building in my chest since he said my name. How he knew who I was, how he knew anything about me at all. And for the first time his expression changed, not softer, not warmer, just focused, like I had finally asked the right question. Because you were always going to end up here, he said, and the answer made no sense. It was not an explanation. It was a statement that felt like it came from a place I could not reach, and I felt that flicker of anger again, stronger now, pushing me forward as I told him he did not get to decide that my life was not something he could plan or predict, that I had choices, and I was choosing to walk away. I took another step, slower this time, testing him, testing the space between us, and again he did not stop me, did not raise a hand or give a command, and yet the air felt heavier, like it was pressing against me, like something unseen was holding me exactly where I was supposed to be. You think this is about control, he said quietly, and I hated how easily he read me, how he seemed to follow every thought before I could even fully form it. But if I wanted control, you would not be standing there deciding anything. And the calm certainty in his voice made my stomach twist, not because it sounded like a threat, but because it sounded like the truth. I swallowed hard, my gaze dropping for a second before I forced myself to look back at him, refusing to let him take more from me than he already had, and I told him that none of this explained why me, why tonight, why a random girl driving a car that barely worked, and for the first time there was a pause, a brief silence that stretched between us, not empty but filled with something unspoken, something he was choosing not to say. He glanced at the damaged car, then back at me. And when he spoke again his voice was quieter, almost thoughtful. There is nothing random about you, Emily. And the way he said it made my chest tighten, because it sounded like he believed it completely, like this entire night had been inevitable in a way I could not comprehend. The rain continued to fall around us, steady and relentless, and I became aware of how still everything else was. No passing cars, no distant sirens, just the sound of water and the space we occupied in the middle of it, like the world had narrowed down to this one moment, this one choice I could not seem to make. Come with me, he said finally, not as an order, but as something else, something closer to an invitation, and I almost said no immediately, the word rising to my lips out of instinct, out of fear, out of the desperate need to hold on to whatever control I still had. But then I looked past him again, at the empty street, at the place where the headlights had disappeared, and I realized something that settled deep and heavy in my chest. Staying here alone was not safer. Leaving blindly was not freedom, and whatever answers I was searching for, they were not out there in the dark. They were standing right in front of me, waiting for me to step closer, and for reasons I could not fully explain. My feet did not move away this time. The silence between us stretched just long enough to feel like a decision, and when I did not move away, something subtle shifted in his posture, not relief, not victory, just confirmation, like a piece falling exactly where it was meant to go. I exhaled slowly, my breath visible in the cold air, and told myself this was not surrender. This was information. This was me choosing to understand before I chose anything else. And that thought steadied me just enough to lift my chin and meet his gaze. Again, asking him where he expected me to go with him, what exactly he thought was going to happen next. Somewhere dry. He replied simply, glancing at the rain as if it were an inconvenience rather than a force that had just changed the direction of my life. And before I could argue, One of the men stepped forward with a dark umbrella, opening it without a word and holding it just high enough to shield us both. The movement smooth, practiced, like this kind of moment happened more often than it should. I hesitated when Luca gestured toward the SUV, my eyes flicking to the dent I had caused, small but real, a reminder that this had started with something tangible, something I could understand, and I asked him again why he said what he said, why he acted like I belonged to him, because that was not something you could just decide for another person, and he paused, his hand resting lightly against the open door, his expression unreadable for a fraction of a second before he answered. Because it is the simplest way to explain something that is not simple. And the response only deepened the confusion, frustration tightening in my chest as I stepped closer despite myself. Drawn by the need for answers, I could not seem to walk away from. The interior of the SUV was warm, the leather seats untouched by the chaos outside, and I stood there for a moment, caught between instinct and curiosity, before finally getting in, the door closing behind me with a quiet finality that echoed louder than it should have, like a line being drawn that I could not step back across. Luca moved around the vehicle and slid into the seat beside me, not too close, not imposing, just present, and the car began to move almost immediately, smooth and controlled, as if the driver had been waiting for this exact moment. I watched the city blur past the tinted windows, the familiar streets suddenly unfamiliar, every turn taking me further from the version of my life that had existed an hour ago, and I realized I had not asked the most important question yet, the one that mattered more than how he knew my name or why he had been there tonight. So I turned toward him, my voice quieter now but steady, and asked him what he actually wanted from me. He did not answer right away, his gaze fixed ahead, thoughtful in a way that suggested he was choosing his words carefully. And when he finally spoke, it was softer than before, almost reflective. I want you to remember. And the words settled into the space between us with a weight I did not understand, my brow furrowing as I searched his face for some kind of explanation, because I did not know what he meant, did not know what I was supposed to remember. And yet something deep in my chest tightened, as if a part of me recognized the question before I did. The car turned onto a quieter street, the noise of the city fading into something distant and muted, and I realized with a sudden clarity that whatever answers he was talking about, they were not going to be simple, and they were not going to be easy, and for the first time since the crash, the fear I felt was not just about him. It was about what I might discover if I stayed. The word remember stayed with me longer than anything else he had said, echoing in the quiet space of the car as the city lights slid across the tinted windows in blurred streaks. And I tried to make sense of it, tried to find something in my mind that connected to him, to this night, to anything that could explain why a stranger spoke to me like we shared a past I could not see. I shifted slightly in my seat, my fingers still cold from the rain, pressing them together just to feel something. Steady as I told him I did not understand, that I had never seen him before, that whatever he thought I was supposed to remember, it was not there, and this time he turned his head just enough to look at me. Not surprised, not disappointed, just patient, like he had expected that answer all along. You would not, he said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made my chest tighten again, not fear this time, something closer to frustration mixed with curiosity, because he kept speaking in pieces, in fragments that felt intentional, like he was giving me just enough to stay but not enough to leave. I looked away from him and back out the window, watching as the streets grew quieter, the buildings taller, more private, less familiar, and I realized we were moving into a part of the city I had never had a reason to visit before, the kind of place you only saw in passing, where everything looked polished and distant, untouched by the kind of life I lived. Then explain it, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt, because if he expected me to stay, if he expected me to listen, then I needed something real in return, something I could hold on to that was not just vague words and careful silence. The car slowed slightly as we turned onto a long, curved driveway lined with soft lights that glowed against the rain, and I felt my breath catch. Again, not from fear but from the sudden awareness of where this was leading, a place that felt removed from everything I knew, controlled in a way that made the outside world seem distant and small. Some things are not explained, he said after a moment, his gaze returning forward as the gates ahead opened without hesitation. They are remembered, and the repetition of that word made my grip tighten in my lap, because it felt less like a suggestion now and more like something inevitable. Something he believed would happen whether I understood it or not. The car passed through the gates and continued forward, the sound of rain softening as we moved under covered stone, and I felt a strange pull in my chest, a quiet unease that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the feeling that I had been here before, not physically, not in a way I could place, but in something deeper, something I could not quite reach. I shook my head slightly, trying to push the thought away, telling myself it was just stress, just the aftermath of everything that had happened, but it lingered anyway, sitting just beneath the surface like a memory that refused to fully form. The car came to a smooth stop, and for a second neither of us moved, the silence filling the space again as I became aware of my own heartbeat, slower now, but still unsteady. And I realized that stepping out of this car would mean stepping further into whatever this was, further away from the version of my life that had made sense just hours ago. I turned toward him one more time, searching his face for something clear, something certain, and instead I found that same calm expression, that same quiet confidence that made it feel like he was already ahead of me, already waiting for me to catch up. "Emily," he said softly, and this time my name did not feel like a question or a discovery. It felt like a reminder, like something I was supposed to recognize, and I could not explain why, but for a brief, disorienting moment, it almost felt familiar. I did not move right away when the car stopped, my hand resting lightly against the door handle as I stared out at the structure in front of me, trying to process the scale of it, the way the lights reflected softly against polished stone, the kind of place that did not just belong to someone, it belonged around them, like the world had been shaped to fit their presence. I swallowed slowly, reminding myself to breathe, reminding myself that I had chosen this, at least for now, and that meant I could still choose what to do next, even if it did not feel that way. The door opened from the outside before I could reach for it. One of the men standing there with the same quiet efficiency as before, holding the umbrella steady as if the rain itself were something to be managed, and I hesitated for just a second before stepping out, my shoes meeting dry ground beneath the covered entrance. The shift from cold rain to controlled warmth almost disorienting. I wrapped my arms around myself. Again, not from temperature this time, but from the feeling of stepping into a place where everything was intentional, every detail chosen, every movement expected, and I realized I had not felt this out of place in a very long time. Lucas stepped out beside me, his presence immediate but not overwhelming, like gravity rather than force, and without looking at me he began to walk forward, not checking if I followed, not asking, just moving with the quiet certainty that I would, and I hated how accurate that assumption was because after a brief pause, I did follow, my steps slower, more cautious, but still moving in the direction he had already chosen. The doors opened before we reached them, revealing a space that felt both vast and contained, the lighting soft, the air warm, everything arranged with a precision that made it feel less like a home and more like a controlled environment, and I stopped just inside the threshold, my eyes taking in the details without really seeing them, because my focus was still on him, on the way he moved through the space like it was an extension of himself. "You can take off the jacket," he said quietly, and I blinked, realizing I was still clutching it tightly around me, my fingers stiff as I loosened them slightly, unsure whether to trust the simple instruction or question the intention behind it, because nothing about tonight had been simple. I glanced toward him, searching for any sign of impatience or expectation, but there was none, just that same calm presence, watching without pressing, and slowly, cautiously, I slipped the jacket off my shoulders, holding it in my hands instead of letting it go completely, a small, silent decision to keep something of my own within reach. He noticed, of course he did, but he did not comment, and that almost unsettled me more than if he had. "You are safe here," he said again, and this time the words landed differently, not comforting, not reassuring, just repeated, like something he needed me to hear more than once, and I found myself wondering if he was trying to convince me or himself. I took a few tentative steps further inside, my gaze drifting across the space until it caught on something small and unexpected, a framed photograph placed on a table near the wall, simple, almost out of place among everything else, and for reasons I could not explain, I felt drawn to it, my feet moving before my mind fully caught up. I stopped in front of it, my breath catching as I leaned slightly closer, the image coming into focus, and for a second, everything else disappeared again. The room, the rain, even him, because the girl in that photograph looked at the camera with a familiarity that sent a sharp, disorienting jolt through me. Like I was looking at something I should recognize but could not place, and I did not realize I had whispered it out loud until I heard my own voice, barely steady, asking, "Who is she?" Even though something deep inside me was already afraid of the answer. The moment the question left my lips, I wished I could take it back, because something in the air changed, subtle but undeniable, like I had stepped onto a line that had been waiting for me to cross it. I did not turn around right away, but I felt him move, felt the shift of his presence behind me, slower this time, more deliberate, and that alone made my chest tighten as I kept my eyes on the photograph, trying to ground myself in something real, something I could see and understand. The girl in the picture looked younger, maybe early 20s, standing in soft sunlight with a kind of quiet confidence that felt familiar in a way I could not explain, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders, her expression calm but knowing, like she understood something the rest of the world did not, and the longer I stared, the stronger that strange pull became, like recognition just out of reach. "You already know the answer," Lucas said quietly behind me, and I shook my head immediately. Too fast, too certain, because I did not know, I could not know. And whatever he thought I was remembering, it was not real, it could not be real. I turned then, finally facing him, my fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the table as I told him again that I had never been here before, that I had never seen that photo, that none of this made sense. And for the first time there was something different in his eyes, not doubt, not confusion, something closer to restraint, like he was holding back words he had already decided not to say. "Her name was Elena," he said after a moment, and the name settled heavily in the space between us, unfamiliar and yet not entirely, like a sound I had heard once a long time ago and forgotten until now. I frowned slightly, repeating it in my mind, trying to attach it to something concrete, a memory, a face, a moment, but nothing came, only that same quiet unease building deeper in my chest. I repeated softly, catching the way he said it, and his gaze did not waver, did not soften, just held mine with that same calm intensity as he nodded once. "She disappeared 10 years ago," he continued, his voice steady, controlled, but there was something beneath it now, something harder to define, something that felt personal in a way everything else had not, and I felt a flicker of something shift inside me again, not fear this time, something closer to curiosity edged with something I did not want to name. I glanced back at the photograph, then back at him, my thoughts racing as I tried to connect the pieces he was giving me, because this was the first thing that felt like information instead of implication, the first thing that could actually mean something, and yet it still did not explain why I was here, why he had said what he said, why he looked at me like I was more than just a stranger who had crashed into his car. "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, my voice quieter now, more careful, because I could feel the answer sitting somewhere just beneath the surface, something I was not sure I was ready to hear. He took another step closer, close enough now that I could see the smallest shift in his expression, the way his eyes studied my face like he was searching for something specific, something he had been waiting to find. And when he spoke again, it was softer than anything he had said before, almost certain, everything. And the word echoed through me in a way I could not ignore, because deep down, in a place I could not fully reach, something inside me was starting to respond, not with understanding, not yet, but with recognition, and that was what scared me the most. Everything settled into silence after that word, heavy and still, like the room itself was waiting to see what I would do with it. And I felt my heartbeat pick up again, not from fear alone but from something deeper, something unsettled, because the way he said it did not feel like a guess. It felt like a conclusion he had already reached. I shook my head slowly, trying to push back against it, trying to hold on to the version of reality that still made sense, the one where I was just Emily Carter, a girl who worked long hours, paid her bills, and stayed out of trouble, a girl who did not belong in a place like this, did not belong in a story like this, and certainly did not belong in whatever past he was trying to pull Me too. No, I said, my voice quieter now, but still firm. Because I needed it to be. I needed something to remain certain. I am not her. And for the first time since I had met him, there was a pause that felt different, not calculated, not controlled. Just a brief moment where something real flickered across his expression before it disappeared again. He did not argue, did not correct me, and that almost made it worse, because I did not know if he disagreed or if he was simply waiting, the same way he had been waiting for everything else. I turned back to the photograph, forcing myself to look at it again. Really look this time, searching for anything that could prove him wrong, any detail that separated me from the girl in that frame. And there were differences, small ones, the angle of her smile, the softness in her eyes. But the more I focused, the more those differences blurred, replaced by something unsettlingly familiar, something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not ignore. You said she disappeared. I murmured, my voice almost lost in the quiet of the room. People do not just disappear. And even as I said it, I realized how weak it sounded, how little it explained, because standing here, in this moment, nothing about what I believed to be true felt solid anymore. Lucas stepped closer, not enough to crowd me, just enough to be within reach, his presence steady, grounding in a way I did not want to admit. And when he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost careful, like he was choosing each word with intention. Not everyone disappears the same way. And I felt that strange pull again, stronger this time, like something inside me was responding before I could stop it. I pressed my fingers lightly against my temple, trying to clear the sudden pressure building there. The faint echo of something just beyond my grasp, a flicker of an image, a feeling, a place I could not quite see. And I closed my eyes for a second, just long enough for it to almost form before it slipped away again. When I opened them, he was still watching me, not with triumph, not with certainty, but with something quieter, something that felt like recognition waiting to happen. And that scared me more than anything else tonight. If I remember, I said slowly, choosing the words carefully, because they felt important in a way I could not explain. What happens then? And the question hung between us, fragile and heavy at the same time, because I was not sure if I wanted the answer, not really, but I needed to hear it anyway. He held my gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching just enough to make my pulse quicken again, and then he said it, not as a threat, not even as a promise, but as something inevitable, something that had already been decided long before tonight. Then you will understand why you were never meant to leave. And the words settled into me like a quiet echo, not loud, not overwhelming, just there, persistent and unshakable. And for the first time since the crash, I was no longer sure if I was trying to escape him or the truth he was slowly pulling me toward.